December 1944 arrived with exhaustion baked into the Allied command. Western Europe was supposed to be finished. Paris was liberated. The German army was retreating. Victory felt inevitable, if not immediate. Yet beneath that confidence lay something dangerous: assumption. The belief that the enemy was finished, that he no longer had the strength, the fuel, or the will to strike back. In the early hours of December 16th, that belief shattered. Under heavy cloud cover and falling snow, more than 250,000 German soldiers surged forward through the Ardennes forest. It was a region the Allies considered strategically unimportant, too dense, too narrow, too frozen for modern armored warfare. The same assumption had been made in 1940. The Germans remembered that lesson well. American units were caught completely off guard. Communications collapsed almost immediately. Telephone lines were cut. Radios failed. Entire regiments disappeared into the fog. German tanks punched through thinly held positions, overrunning supply depots and command posts before many American soldiers even knew an offensive had begun. By December 19th, the situation was dire. At Supreme Headquarters near Verdun, the air inside the briefing room was thick with cigarette smoke and wet wool. Senior Allied commanders gathered around maps marked with frantic grease pencil lines. The front had bent inward, forming a massive bulge nearly 50 miles deep. Entire sections of the U.S. First Army were in danger of encirclement. Fuel dumps were lost, roads were clogged with refugees, retreating units, and wrecked vehicles frozen in place by snow and ice. General Dwight D. Eisenhower studied the map in silence. He understood what this was. Not just a counterattack, but a gamble, Hitler's last strategic roll of the dice. If the Germans could split the Allied armies and capture the port of Antwerp, they could force a negotiated peace in the West. Time was everything, and time was slipping away. That was when Lieutenant General George S. Patton walked into the room. At 59 years old, Patton cut a distinctive figure. Polished helmet, riding boots, the posture of a man who seemed carved rather than born. To some officers, he was a savior. To others, a liability. Brilliant, aggressive, profane, and utterly convinced of his own destiny. Many in the room barely looked up. They were too tired, too overwhelmed. Eisenhower broke the silence. "George," he asked evenly, "how long would it take you to turn the Third Army north?" Patton didn't consult a map. He didn't ask for clarification. He didn't pause. 48 hours, he said. "I can attack with 3 divisions in 2 days." The room froze. Someone laughed, not mockingly, nervously, a short, bitter sound, because what Patton had just proposed bordered on insanity. The Third Army was fully engaged to the south, fighting in Lorraine. To do what Patton suggested would require disengaging 6 divisions from active combat, pivoting an entire army 90 degrees, and driving more than 100 miles through snow-choked roads, all while remaining ready to fight one of the largest armored forces Germany had ever assembled. In winter, in near-zero temperatures, under enemy air threat. One officer muttered quietly, "He's finally lost his mind." But Patton didn't argue. He didn't justify himself. He simply stood there, certain. What no one in that room yet understood was that Patton was not improvising. He was executing. George Patton had been preparing for this moment long before the first German tank rolled forward in the Ardennes, long before Eisenhower asked the question, long before the Bulge existed. Patton was a man shaped by inheritance. Born into a family steeped in military tradition, he grew up believing, truly believing, that he was destined for war. His ancestors had fought in every major American conflict. His grandfather died leading Confederate troops at Winchester during the Civil War. That legacy weighed on him constantly. Patton didn't see command as a career, he saw it as fate. By 1944, he commanded over 250,000 men. The Third Army was the most aggressive and mobile force the Allies possessed. When it moved fast. When it attacked, it did so relentlessly. Patton believed momentum was everything. To stop was to die. Yet for all his success, doubts followed him. Critics whispered that Patton was only effective when the enemy was already broken, that he thrived in pursuit, not resistance. His autumn campaign through Lorraine had stalled under stiff German defense. Casualties mounted, progress slowed. For a man obsessed with speed, it was torture. Worse still, Patton carried the shadow of Sicily. In August 1943, he struck 2 American soldiers suffering from battle fatigue. The incidents exploded back home. Newspapers called for his removal. Politicians demanded a court-martial. For a time, it seemed Patton's career was over. Eisenhower seriously considered sending him home in disgrace. But Eisenhower knew something others did not. The Germans feared Patton. Intercepted intelligence revealed Wehrmacht commanders repeatedly asking the same question before committing forces. Where is Patton? His reputation alone shaped enemy decisions. So Eisenhower kept him, but sidelined him, turned him into a decoy. For months, Patton commanded a phantom army in England designed to convince Germany that the Allied invasion would strike at Calais, not Normandy. While others stormed the beaches on D-Day, Patton waited. For a man who believed history had chosen him, the wait was agony. That frustration sharpened his focus. He studied patterns, he listened to intelligence, and in early December 1944, something didn't sit right. German radio traffic was going quiet. Entire units were disappearing from reconnaissance reports. Movements didn't align with retreat, they aligned with preparation. On December 9th, Patton's intelligence officer came to him with concerns. "General," he said, "I think they're massing for an offensive, probably through the Ardennes." Patton didn't look surprised. "I know, I've been thinking the same thing." They spread maps across the table. The Ardennes made perfect sense. Dense forest, poor roads, bad weather. Exactly where the Allies wouldn't expect a major attack. Exactly where German armor had broken through once before. Patton made a decision then, quietly, without approval. He ordered his staff to prepare contingency plans, not 1, but 3. Each detailed a rapid pivot north. Different force packages, different routes, different timelines. Units were pre-designated, supply lines mapped, orders drafted and ready. He told no one outside his headquarters. So when the German offensive erupted on December 16th, Patton's reaction was not shock or panic. It was confirmation. "Good," he reportedly said. "We can kill them there just as well as anywhere else." 3 days later, standing in Eisenhower's headquarters, Patton wasn't making a promise. He was revealing a plan already in motion. And the clock had already started. On night of December 19th, 1944, while snow fell steadily across northeastern France and Belgium, the largest rapid redeployment in American military history began, not with fanfare, but with paperwork. Orders moved out across the Third Army's command network in carefully coded transmissions. There were no speeches, no dramatic announcements. Division commanders simply received instructions that defied precedent. Units were to disengage from active combat, pivot 90 degrees, and move north at once. Objectives were clear. Timelines were non-negotiable. There would be no delay. For most armies, such a maneuver would have taken weeks. Frontline units are not designed to turn on command. They are anchored by supply lines, artillery positions, fuel depots, medical stations, and communications hubs that grow roots the moment they are established. To tear them free without collapse requires absolute coordination and absolute authority. Patton had both. The Third Army had been built for motion. Its officers were conditioned to expect the unexpected. Initiative was rewarded, hesitation punished. Where other armies waited for permission, Patton demanded action. That culture now revealed its purpose. Across a front more than 100 miles wide, vehicles began to move. Tanks disengaged under cover of darkness. Artillery batteries limbered up and rolled out. Engineers cleared roads buried beneath ice and wreckage. Military police redirected traffic that had already descended into chaos, as refugees, supply convoys, and retreating units clogged every usable route. The weather made everything worse. Temperatures dropped well below freezing. Snow turned roads into glass. Engines seized. Fuel lines froze solid. Men slept in ditches beside their vehicles, burning ration crates for warmth. Frostbite claimed fingers, toes, ears. The cold was not an inconvenience, it was a killer. Yet the movement continued. Patton's advantage was not genius alone. It was preparation layered atop industrial scale. American logistics operated on a level the Germans could no longer match. The Red Ball Express mentality, developed during the breakout from Normandy, meant supply officers had authority to improvise without waiting for orders. Ammunition dumps appeared overnight. Fuel trucks were diverted mid-route. If a vehicle broke down, it was pushed aside and replaced. There was always another truck. German intelligence failed to grasp this reality. At Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt's headquarters, reports painted a reassuring picture. Allied forces were disorganized. American units were retreating. Resistance was stiffening but slow. Rundstedt estimated that any significant counterattack from Patton would require at least 10 to 14 days. That assumption was fatal. By December 21st, the German High Command still believed Patton was trapped in the South. They had no idea that 3 full American divisions were already approaching the Ardennes from an unexpected direction. No idea that the army they feared most was moving faster than any calculation allowed. Patton drove his commanders relentlessly. He slept little. He toured units in person, standing in the snow, barking orders, demanding progress. When officers raised concerns about roads or fuel, his response was simple: fix it. To Patton, obstacles were moral failures. By the morning of December 22nd, the spearhead of the Third Army was in position. The 4th Armored Division, hardened by months of combat, was designated as the primary relief force for Bastogne, a small Belgian crossroads town that had become the center of the German advance. Bastogne mattered because roads mattered. Whoever controlled the town controlled movement in the Ardennes. The Germans knew this, so did the Americans. Inside Bastogne, the 101st Airborne Division had been surrounded for days. Paratroopers dug foxholes into frozen ground they could barely penetrate. Ammunition was running low. Medical supplies were nearly gone. Wounded men lay in freezing barns without morphine or plasma. German artillery pounded the town relentlessly. On December 22nd, German commanders sent an ultimatum demanding surrender. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe read it carefully. Then he smiled. "Nuts," he said. The reply was delivered with polite confusion. German officers were unsure if it was an insult or a mistranslation. Soon enough, they understood. The weather still favored the Germans. Thick cloud cover grounded Allied aircraft, allowing German armor to move without fear of air attack. Patton knew that time was closing. If Bastogne fell before his forces arrived, the German offensive would gain the momentum it needed. He ordered the attack anyway. At 0600 hours on December 22nd, the Third Army struck northward into the teeth of the German advance. Snow blanketed the landscape. Visibility was poor. Temperatures hovered near 8 degrees Fahrenheit. Tank engines refused to start without blowtorches. Weapon lubricants froze. Machine guns jammed. None of it mattered. The 4th Armored Division advanced yard by yard, village by village. Each small town became a separate battle. German units fought desperately, knowing that stopping Patton here might decide the war in the West. Roads were mined, bridges blown. Panzerfaust teams stalked American tanks from tree lines and stone houses. Progress was brutal and slow. 7 miles on the first day. 7 miles bought with blood. Sherman tanks burned along narrow roads. Infantry advanced through knee-deep snow under machine gun fire. Casualties mounted. Yet for every tank destroyed, another took its place. For every unit stalled, another pushed forward. Patton accepted losses without hesitation. Speed mattered more than caution, momentum more than preservation. He believed that shock broke enemies faster than firepower. On December 23rd, the skies finally cleared. Patton had ordered his chaplain weeks earlier to write a prayer for good weather. Whether by coincidence or fate, Allied aircraft returned in force. Fighter bombers roared overhead, strafing German columns and smashing supply lines already stretched beyond endurance. The psychological impact was immediate. German infantry, already exhausted and freezing, found themselves exposed. Vehicles were destroyed on open roads, fuel convoys burned. The offensive that had begun with such confidence now began to stall. Patton sensed the shift. He pressed harder. By December 26th, the 4th Armored Division reached the outskirts of Bastogne. Resistance intensified as German commanders attempted to seal the gap. The fighting narrowed to a single snow-covered road. Mines, ambushes, artillery fire from both sides. At 1650 hours, Lieutenant Charles Bulge led his Sherman tanks forward through the smoke and snow. As they crested a rise, American paratroopers emerged from the tree line. The relief had arrived. The corridor was only 500 yards wide. It was vulnerable. It was fragile. But it was enough. For the first time since the offensive began, the German timetable was broken. And once broken, it would never recover. Absolutely. Below is Part 3, the final section, written as a full documentary conclusion, dense, cinematic, and reflective, designed to run around 4 Google Docs pages. This completes the story with the collapse of the German offensive, its strategic consequences, and Patton's legacy. The relief of Bastogne did not end the Battle of the Bulge. It ended something far more important, the illusion that Germany still controlled the tempo of the war. Once the corridor was opened on December 26th, the German offensive began to unravel with alarming speed. What had started as a carefully calculated strike now collapsed under the weight of its own ambition. Fuel shortages became catastrophic, ammunition ran low. Units that had advanced deep into Allied lines found themselves isolated, exposed, and unable to move. Kampfgruppe Piper, once the spearhead of the northern advance, abandoned dozens of Tiger and Panther tanks, not because they were destroyed, but because they were empty. Fuel trucks never arrived. Roads were clogged with wreckage. Allied aircraft dominated the skies, turning every movement into a gamble with death. Patton did not pause to consolidate. He attacked again and again, forcing the Germans to fight while retreating, denying them the chance to regroup. The Third Army pivoted from relief to destruction, smashing into German flanks that had never been prepared to face such pressure. What the Germans had assumed would take weeks had taken days. Their carefully planned timetable was shattered beyond repair. By early January 1945, the initiative had fully shifted back to the Allies. American and British forces began squeezing the Bulge from north and south. The once threatening salient shrank under constant assault. Villages changed hands repeatedly. The terrain itself became an enemy, snow melting into mud, frozen ground turning to slush beneath tanks and artillery. Casualties mounted on both sides. For the Germans, the losses were irreplaceable. Over 100,000 men killed, wounded, or captured. More than 700 tanks destroyed or abandoned. Entire veteran formations ceased to exist. Most devastating of all, the offensive consumed Germany's last operational reserves in the West. This was the cost Hitler could not afford. When the Soviet Union launched its massive winter offensive in mid-January, the German army had nothing left to stop it. Divisions that might have reinforced the Eastern Front lay buried beneath the snow of the Ardennes. The Battle of the Bulge, intended as a bold reversal, instead accelerated Germany's collapse. Inside Allied headquarters, the scale of what had occurred slowly became clear. What Patton had achieved was not merely a successful counterattack, it was a demonstration of modern warfare at its most unforgiving, where preparation, logistics, speed, and will outweighed numbers and even terrain. The Third Army's 90-degree turn under fire became a case study that would be taught in military academies for generations. After the war, German generals were interrogated extensively. Again and again, one theme emerged. They had expected Patton to respond, but not like this. General Gunther Blumentritt later admitted, "We regarded Patton as the most dangerous of your generals. We did not expect him to react so quickly. We believed we had 2 weeks. He did it in 2 days. This was extraordinary." Those 2 days changed everything. Patton himself recorded the moment with characteristic bluntness. In his diary, he wrote that the rapid turn of the Third Army would likely be considered a masterpiece, but that, in his view, it was simply the result of knowing one's profession and preparing properly for it. There was no false humility in that statement. Patton believed absolutely in preparation. He believed that luck favored those who worked harder than their enemies. And in December 1944, that belief was vindicated. Winston Churchill later described the Battle of the Bulge as the greatest American battle of the war and an ever-famous American victory. Yet within that victory, Patton's role stood apart. While others reacted, he anticipated. While others calculated, he moved. The officers who laughed in Eisenhower's headquarters on December 19th never laughed again. History, however, would remember Patton as a paradox. A brilliant commander, a difficult man, revered by his soldiers and feared by his enemies, yet constantly at war with authority, politics, and himself. His career would end abruptly after the war, not on the battlefield, but in a quiet accident far from the guns that had defined his life. But in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, his legacy was sealed. The Germans had bet everything on speed, surprise, and Allied hesitation. They found instead an army that turned faster than thought, struck harder than expected, and refused to yield time they no longer had. The snow that fell in December 1944 covered the wreckage of that gamble, burned out tanks, frozen bodies, shattered ambitions. The Ardennes would not be remembered as Hitler's comeback, but as his final defeat in the West. Patton understood something simple and brutal. The impossible is often just the difficult that no one else is willing to attempt. The Germans learned that lesson too late. And when they finally stopped laughing, they were already retreating, through forests stained crimson, pursued by an army that had arrived like a winter storm. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.